So we enter an entirely new world of quite unbelievable dimensions, and yet it's only a few years away.
Do you understand? I doubt it. Do you understand? I doubt that.
Oil is a magnet for war. Oil starts wars.
It's all coming to a grinding halt.
You hear me now, son boy?
We're moving from an era of cheap, abundant energy to an era of scarce, hard to get, expensive energy.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Can the car make it?
I got bronchitis. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Hello, folks. I'm a carbon atom, and since I'm an essential part of each of the hydrocarbons in crude oil, I'm here to give you the inside dope on gasoline.
Oil is our God. I don't care if somebody says they worship Jesus, Buddha, Allah, whoever. They actually worship petroleum.
%70 of the barrel of oil is refined into transportation fuels, which include motor gasoline, diesel fuel, jet fuel, railroad fuel, and maritime fuel. 98% of all transportation energy comes from oil.
Construction of an average car consumes somewhere between the energy equivalent of 27 and 54 barrels of oil, depending on whose statistics you use. A computer, the construction of the average desktop computer, consumes 10 times this weight in fossil fuels. A microchip consumes 630 times this weight in fossil fuels during its construction. For every calorie that you eat in the United States, and probably a similar number in other industrialized nations, requires 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy.
When the organic material was buried to a depth of about 2,000 meters, chemical reactions converted it into oil.
What it comes down to is that the oil industry has to please Mrs. Martin and millions just like her. Already today, she's used some 87 petroleum products, including the plastic bacon wrapper and the wax of the milk carton. She'll top 100 before the day is over. The pump does not know when midnight comes. Days are the same to it. It pumps from Tuesday into Wednesday without a halt. Each day, every day, it brings us another 24 hours of progress. Building our nation, guarding its security, assuring the future of America.
Oil running out, peak oil, that's it. That's it. That's never happened before. The very engine of civilization.
The concept of peak oil is that basically we're right about there at the globe.
Coincided the discovery and the use of oil and industrialization of that oil economy coincided with this tremendous population burst. And it's all coming to a grinding halt.
Our industrial progress and economic growth was fired by what many seem to look on as endless energy. But warning signs were there.
The price of oil is just going to keep on rising and rising and rising. There's no way we're going to get out of this pattern because the demand is increasing and the supply is reaching a maximum.
Well, this decline is happening all over the world.
The world.
The world.
When the oil here is all gone, these wells will be dry, worthless.
That's going to cause major problems, perhaps major wars, who knows what.
But it's like so many people don't even see it, don't even understand what that actually means.
I mean, I never thought they would ever come to this. I mean, I feel like I'm in a science fiction movie, a bad science fiction movie, right?
It was announced today that gasless Sundays will go into effect as of next month.
And when several circuits break at the same time, we have an energy crisis.
Not 1 in 50, not 1 in 100 of the people in our country have any inkling of the potential problem that we're facing.
Increased unemployment, poverty, bankruptcy, starvation. There are all kind of the things that happen when a society collapses.
At the same time, we are making ourselves dependent on some extremely unstable regimes in some very nasty parts of the world.
Keeping the world dependence on oil as long as possible is important.
Oil is the excrement of the devil. El excremento del diablo.
Oil is the black blood.
Oil is the blood of the dinosaurs.
This is the bloodstream of the world economy.
Oil is the blood of the earth.
One barrel of oil, the refined product of which 42 gallons of gasoline you can buy for a little over $100, will produce as much energy, as much work as you will get from 12 people working all year for you.
Take an average man performing physical labor for 25,000 hours to produce the amount of energy that's contained in that 1 barrel of oil. That barrel of oil, if it's pulled out of the ground in Iraq, can be pulled out of the ground for $1. You invest $1 and you get back 25,000 hours of human labor. That's an energy source that is so dense, it's essentially free energy.
It's all non-renewable, it's all extremely capital intensive, and it's probably the most invaluable natural resource we've ever discovered.
Here he was last night, heading to Capitol Hill. Everyone expected him to talk about Iraq, freedom and terror, but no one expected this.
And here we have a serious problem.
America is addicted to oil, which is often imported from unstable parts of the world.
What the hell is this crap?
Instead of creating conditions for peace, they are making conditions for conflict.
I think it's going to end with everybody changing their habits.
Just start working now, otherwise we won't have time. We're going to be out of oil within a few years.
Well, just looking at my bills, I'm getting upset. Paying more for electricity every month. And the gasoline is going up. And I'm used to being able to go when I want to, but suddenly I think I'm going to have to start curbing my habits.
My family and I have tended to conserve energy, both in limiting the use of our cars.
People say, well, it's not going to run out in our time. We have to think of our kids and our kids' kids and how they're going to have to put up with a whole lot of stuff. just because we're not careful.
What I've seen of people, most of them are pretty selfish. It's all right to let somebody else do it, but when it comes right down to home, why, they just want to go along the same old way.
And when you look at it, you wonder why you didn't do this before, but I'm sure it'll be carried forward in the future, and new and better ways to conserve energy will be thought of.
20 years from now, by that time they are dead. We don't care.
If I understood correctly.
We must change if we're going to have the energy we need. If we want new oil, we've got to look in new places. We must demand more efficient engines for our cars. We must push forward at whatever cost, whatever the development of new energy resources.
Yes, that's right.
The liquids that come out of oil as it's processed and refined create the building block for all of our petrochemical, chemical, plastics, pharmaceutical, these, zillions of things.
Fires, insecticides, cosmetics, weed killers, a whole galaxy of things to make a better life on Earth. And it isn't just oil companies that try to outdo each other, competing for the customer's dollar. The same story is true of almost every successful business enterprise on the whole planet.
Well, whether you know it or not, every single preparation on this beautiful lady's dressing table, every single thing she is wearing is influenced by oil. Just for fun, let's take away all these articles dependent upon petroleum. Her hand mirror, cosmetics, perfume, and manicure set made of plastics. Her synthetic silk negligee, her silk under... Oh, science can go no further.
Attention all passengers, Flight 307 is canceled until further notice.
We're not discovering as much as we're using. How much longer do we have to go? So whether it's 20 years, or whether it's 40 years, or whether it's 50 years, doesn't matter. The end game is coming.
Until 1950, the United States could supply the energy needed. But in less than 25 years, we found ourselves in trouble. Each year, we used 5% more, doubling our demand every 12 to 14 years. The gasoline engine demanded fuel to run our cars. We're in an energy crisis now, and will be for some time to come. All we can do is face it, recognize it, and meet the challenges it poses.
We cannot produce as much as we can use, as we are equipped to use in our homes and our factories. This situation is destined to continue indefinitely. And by indefinitely, I mean not only just the next few years, but as far ahead as we can see.
America is addicted to oil.
2/3 of the oil reserves are in the Middle East, which means basically the Persian Gulf. And that's 10 times as much as any other source.
Right now, really the only region of the world that hasn't peaked is the Middle East.
Most of the serious projections for 2030 envision the Middle East producing 51 million barrels a day. We know that Iran peaked at 6 million barrels a day back in 1978, struggles to stay between 3 and 3.5 million barrels a day. Kuwait struggles to keep their 2.5 million barrels a day intact. Maybe we can add 500,000 barrels a day. Maybe the UAE can add 500,000 barrels a day. So to get there, you would have to have Saudi Arabia be producing between 20 and 25 million or even 30 million barrels a day. Those days are long gone. You know, up to 15 million barrels a day is now their sort of new magic number for 50, 75, even 100 years. There are other powerful voices within Saudi Arabia that are clearly sending the message out. 12 million barrels a day, yeah, that's probably okay, but we really shouldn't even think about producing any more than that, ever. They had an intense exploration effort for the last 35 years, and with the exception of one field, the Hatta field, that's the only significant exploration success they had from 1967 through 2005. If Saudi Arabia has now exceeded their sustainable peak supply, then I would argue with some clarity that the world has now exceeded sustainable peak supply. When you reach the peak, you're at the top of the mountain. Sometimes down the other side is very, very gradual slide, and other times down the other side is fairly stiff.
What really matters, and matters enormously, is the view that comes into sight on the other side of this peak when we see this long, relentless, remorseless decline heading off into the valley. Point is that the whole world has got used to this growing side of the mountain range, has to face the opposite side. We have moved now to the point in which virtually everyone accepts that there is a peak.
M. King Hubbard had predicted that worldwide it should be occurring about the turn of the century. That slipped a little because of the Arab oil embargo and the oil price spike hikes and the worldwide recession that reduced the demand for oil quite significantly. And it's now pushed peak oil off till many people believe about now.
We are coming to the end of the first half of the age of oil. During this 150 years, we have seen the growth of everything, of industry, transport, trade, agriculture. We've seen an explosion of the number of people. All of this was made possible by the cheap, abundant supply of oil-based energy.
Demand is on the march, and supply is flattening out.
You will have to supply, if you want to meet the demand, from the current level of 80 million barrels a day to 120 million barrels a day in year 2030. But in order to meet that profile, you would have to add new oil in the amount of 200 million barrels a day, because a lot of that new oil will have to go to compensate for depletion of existing wells.
In the early 70s, over half the globe essentially didn't use any oil. The only serious oil consumers were Europe, not an awful lot in Japan, the United States, Canada, and the former Soviet Union. Africa didn't use any oil of any volume. Middle East didn't use any oil. None of Asia used any oil other than Japan. Today, Papua New Guinea hardly uses any oil. There's probably 2 or 3 islands in the South Pacific that don't use any oil. Everybody else is hooked on trying to create a society that looks like us.
The demand for energy is rising faster than was predicted even 5 years ago. So people all around the world can see the way the developed countries of the world live and how good a life the people have in those areas. So they want to emulate us. They want to be able to drive cars. They want to live in nice houses. They want to have air conditioning and refrigeration. And why shouldn't they?
Demand for energy will only increase as India's standard of living rises, its economy becomes even more diverse and dynamic, and it continues to narrow the gap with more developed nations.
China is not about to have a hard landing. They're exponentially expanding their need for energy. And they're just getting started.
Most urban Chinese believe that they will own a car within 5 years. It's the fastest growing automobile market on earth. Something like 1/3 of them already have driver's licenses. And so the demand for oil and for gasoline in China is really going to take off.
Last year, China increased their importation of oil by 25%. They're now the #2 importer in the world. They increased their use of oil. I read a figure, 14.7%. I don't know how you get that precise. But that's very consistent with an economy that's growing at 10% a year. And by the way, a 10% growth rate doubles in 7 years, 4 times bigger in 14 years, and they're requiring more and more energy.
China and India are kind of getting to the party when the glass is literally half empty at this point. So they're going to have to fight with the rest of us to get what's left.
By applying the talent and technology of America, this country can dramatically improve our environment, move beyond a petroleum-based economy, and make our dependence on Middle Eastern oil a thing of the past.
It's just a plain and simple fact. Too many people using too much oil, and believe it or not, it's almost gone.
Tonight, the state of our union is strong, and together we will make it stronger.
Listen, this is crazy. You are crazy, and I'm more crazy being here and listening to you.
It was the United States, not Saudi Arabia or the Middle East, that was the world's leading producer of oil. And in fact, much of our military and industrial might arose out of our giant oil industry.
We were essentially the Saudi Arabia of the world up until about the 1950s.
McCamey was a boom town for many, many years.
Their attitude was that this was going to last from now on. I know that those people then could not foresee you were ever going to pump all the oil out of the ground in this part of Texas. And they couldn't picture ever running out of oil because it was everywhere and got on everything. Of course, now we realize that you're going to deplete your supply sooner or later. They're not making a lot of dinosaurs anymore.
Oil has always been associated with war. Our very first wars, World War I, World War II, have very important elements of oil in them as a reason for the war, as allowing the war to go on, as a way of securing supply.
Makes your car go. Happy motoring.
More and more oil is going to come from less and less stable places, less and less secure places, places that actually challenge the taking of oil in the first place. Oil fuels war, it's a catalyst for war, it's something that prolongs war, it intensifies war. This is not a pretty picture.
I suppose that the classification of reserves depends on the motivations of the person that's classifying them.
Sort of keep people guessing in a way, keep them off balance.
Most numbers that you will see around the world that lead to these numbers that we were talking about include proven plus probable, and sometimes even possible.
As we look around the world into other countries, we see this same pattern being repeated in one country after another. Today, there's about 58 countries that are physically producing less today than they have in the past. The world has now been sufficiently explored for the oil industry to know now all the promising areas, all the big promising areas have been identified.
We're always a drill bit away from some fabulous new territory. That's the great thing about exploration. But realistically, it's been a long, long period of time since we've actually discovered a significant new basin. I love hearing all these economists say, well, technology and ingenuity will bring out all these changes. And I say, give me a break. I do know oilfield technology backwards and forwards, and the blackboard is dry. And it took 30 to 35 years to develop all of these great tools.
We already have fantastic technology to find oil. We have seismic surveys which are of unbelievable resolution. You can see the smallest formations in the Earth's crust. We have very advanced engineering to produce oil.
And all of these great tools that ended up being great enhanced production techniques were basically super straws, just sucking the last easy oil out of the ground at faster rates, and to no extent significantly increasing the amount of oil that was going to be produced from a significant oil field. That was all myth. In America, we right now think that people are having their eyes gouged out, paying $3.20 for a gallon of gasoline. That's 20 cents a cup. And 20 cents a cup sounds pretty trivial, but if you have a passenger car, average American passenger car, you can get 1 to 6 people in it, throw a bunch of stuff in the luggage, in the trunk, go 1.5 miles in 20 minutes for 20 cents. Now, if you don't have gasoline, and you try to bargain with a guy with a horse-drawn cart or someone coming by with a bicycle, or maybe you're lucky enough to have a rickshaw, said, excuse me, would any of you like to take me 1.5 miles, me and my friends, 1.5 miles for 20 cents? Those people would laugh at you. So I would think that we would need to get oil prices up to, $5 a cup, some number that starts to equate with what we actually spend readily on a lot of things that aren't nearly as valuable and also aren't non-renewable.
The people in the third world countries cannot understand why, for instance, the Europeans, they tried their best in conservation measures, in taxation measures, and the Americans are not doing it.
Not 1 in 50, not 1 in 100 of the people in our country have any inkling of the potential problem that we're facing. If we wait until peak oil to start making the transition, there will be very serious economic consequences. If we anticipate it by 10 years, there will be meaningful economic consequences. To have no economic consequences, you need to anticipate it by 20 years. I'm almost dead certain we don't have 20 years. I don't think we have 10 years. I think we're pretty much there.
Thank you all for coming. Please be seated. Lay the facts out for everybody to see.
I don't think the people in positions to tell the public about it from an official standpoint have been totally honest with us about the problem.
The person who will win an election is somebody who can most persuasively lie to the population, which is tell them what they want to hear, which is that the future is going to be great, just follow me.
If our energy resources are properly developed, they can fulfill our energy requirement for centuries to come. What is needed now is decisive and responsible action to increase our energy supplies, action which takes into account the needs of our economy, of our environment, and of our national security.
In ancient Greece, the person who brought bad news was executed, and politicians who bring bad news frequently are not reelected.
Our political system is just controlled by major corporations. The steps we need to take to reasonably address this in some type of rational way require a downscaling. So if you're the CEO of a big company, are you going to contribute money to the politician who says, hey, I want to slow down the economy, I want to sell fewer cars because we want people to drive less, and that'll cause, their cars won't need to be maintained as much. That will shrink the automotive manufacturing sector, which will shrink the entire economy. Nobody's going to vote for that. I don't even know if I'd vote for that.
The automobile and the power behind it have been major factors in the growth of our country.
We're in some ways a victim of our own success. Suburbia is in a lot of trouble because the whole model of suburbia is you commute 30, 40, 50 miles to your job and back. And that's only viable so long as you've got relatively cheap oil and gas.
not just that the country is spread out. We've evolved our cities for the use of cars. The cities would have to be rebuilt from scratch practically to have more efficient, usable public transportation. This is quite different from the cities in Europe, which were already basically in place before the car was invented. So yes, it's going to be a terrible blow to the United States when we no longer have the oil that we love so much.
But we have waited so long, and the three things that we need are now in very short supply. One of them is money, and in our country we don't worry about money. We just borrow it from our kids and our grandkids in accumulating a debt. But the other two things we can't borrow from our kids and our grandkids, and that's time and energy. In order to make energy available to invest and buy time, we have to have a very vigorous conservation program. Since the United States uses 1/4 of all the world's oil, we clearly need to lead there. I believe that our American people have a great spirit of entrepreneurship and patriotism. If they really knew what the problem was, that they would be very responsive in doing what I think are the necessary things to get ourselves to the other side with as few bumps as possible.
If you tell Americans there's a brand new hydrogen-powered car you can go and buy instead of your car, they'll say, okay, great, I'll go buy it. But if you tell them you're going to have to use a bicycle, that's the type of adaptation that they have to make. People aren't willing to do it.
Many people came to think that it was money that made the world go round, when in reality it was the underlying supply of cheap energy, much of it coming from oil.
You end up with asking, what is more real? Is it the financial market or is it the oil supply in the ground? And everybody will come to the conclusion what is more real is the oil supply in the ground. The financial system is a system full of petrodollars, and if you take them out, it's bound to shrink.
There isn't a company quoted on the stock exchange that doesn't tacitly assume a business-as-usual supply of cheap oil. Well, that isn't there anymore. That means that virtually every company is overvalued on the stock exchange. And as the financial community recognizes this, well, that might trigger some kind of overreaction and stock market collapse. I think it's very likely. I wouldn't be surprised personally if it doesn't trigger another Great Depression comparable to the one of the 1930s, if not worse, because this one is imposed by nature rather than being a speculative bubble.
I've taken this time span here from 5,000 years ago to the present to 5,000 years in the future. Now what we call recorded history began about 5,000 years ago. So what this shows is that this Washington Monument-like spike here is the episode of the fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, and every other kind of fossil fuel in human history. It's the most disturbing thing that's ever happened to the human species. It's responsible for our technological society, and in terms of human history, it's a very brief epoch.
At the time of Christ, there were about 300 million people on the planet, which had somehow about doubled by the end of the 18th century when coal came on. Then came good old oil, and suddenly the population went up 6 times.
I don't think that we could sustain the present population of the globe, much less what it will be in 20 or 30 years, without the use of petrochemicals.
Does it mean we've got to go back to a population not much different from what it was before oil?
In the absence of fossil fuels, how many people can the world support? Many people believe maybe 1.5 billion, 2 billion people. You don't often hope you're wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. They're wrong.
We're facing some sort of unprecedented, unparalleled situation, and that explains why it is so difficult for one to really accept it. One thinks there's got to be a solution. It's somehow contrary to our mindset to think about these things. We just don't like to do it. We've got used to the filling station has been there for as long as we can remember, and normal people say, well, it's going to be there into the future. It's very hard, and it's doubly hard because it really has never happened before. It's a strange issue of mindset and attitude and experience and behavior that somehow leaves us so unprepared for this situation. We identify a species called hydrocarbon man who lives on the strength of all of this oil. Well, his days are definitely numbered. Whether mankind or Homo sapiens as a species altogether will carry on living some different, simple way, that's another question.
Yeah, a lot of people think I'm an idiot, but we'll see who gets the last laugh. Hey, I bet they thought Noah was an idiot too. But just you wait. My ark will be out there in Podunk, Texas with a mess of chickens and goats. See if you think I'm a fool when you're opening that last can of beans and I'm sitting on 10 acres of corn and zucchini. When you're burning down your house in suburbia, I'll be snug as a bug in my dugout with okra growing on the roof.
Right now, we don't have the kind of political leadership. I don't mean only we in the United States. I mean the whole world doesn't have the kind of political leadership that would make us aware of this problem and do something about it.
Listen, this is crazy. You are crazy, and I'm more crazy being here and listening to you.
Yeah, you remember this laugh when you're trying to drink piss and my windmill is pumping a bathtub full of water. You see, I'm getting ready now. Learning all about farming and canning, hunting and trapping, bicycling and recycling. And there'll be the day when you're trying to eat your car seats and I'll be dining on jackrabbit and deer. So go right ahead and laugh. I don't really care, because while you're laughing, I'm stocking up on seeds and tools and books, guns and ammo, bows and arrows, and lots of rope and wire and duct tape. That always comes in handy.
Could we ever actually come up with a replacement for oil?
There's little hope of the politicians taking the lead in this, because it's difficult in government for people to... It's much easier for a politician to react to a crisis when it's happened than to take steps to prepare for it.
This is unreal. This is disgusting. Why doesn't anybody contact the president? Why is he letting this happen?
And each attack must be answered not only with sorrow, but with greater determination, deeper resolve, and bolder action against the killers.
Now, if you think that's a bunch of baloney, then you just haven't heard the facts. And believe you me, you're in for a rude awakening. We're talking darkness. Everything in your life depends on oil. And what happens without it? Well, you're already seeing the beginning. The oil wars, high prices, then'll come the riots and total anarchy. A fight for survival. No food, no water. No Caribbean cruises or flying off to Paris for shopping. Hell, you couldn't even drive to the mall if there was something to buy there. I mean, we're talking the end of life as we know it. Without oil, we'll be stepping back 200 years, except worse. Because most of y'all won't be prepared for it.
Oil is the blood of the dinosaurs.
This is the bloodstream of the world economy.
It's only when the public calls their representatives in Congress and says, you must do something, and we are prepared to support you in whatever actions you take. You don't have those telephone calls being made today.
You want to play what? Okay. Say hello to my dear friend.
But I admit, I'm not quite ready yet for this new dark age. I've got to get in better shape, because 10 years from now, life won't be for the weak. I mean, this ain't like that silly Y2K paranoia, or something as simple as nuclear war. Even the bird flu would look like a blessing compared to this. No, this is reality, and the proof is all around. You see, the last 100 years of comfort prosperity on this planet, that was just a freak of nature. A lucky break that we burned up faster than a stick of dynamite stuck up the timeline of man. It's just a plain and simple fact. Too many people using too much oil, and believe it or not, it's almost gone.
You can't undo where you are. So evolution is always forwards. We're never going backwards. So we will never be back to the farm, and because the evolution just went in a different way. So we basically just have to adapt to the new conditions.
It's very unlikely that once we've run down the other side of Hubbard's Peak, that we're going to be able to maintain the kind of lifestyles that we're now maintaining. This oil is so cheap. It's so readily available. There was just such an enormous temptation to exploit this and to set up a quality of lifestyle that it will be impossible to maintain.
There's something about a horse that has an appeal that the automobile doesn't. I mean, the horse is a living thing, and it's oftentimes between an owner and a horse, a certain amount of affection develops. We're going about 9 miles an hour right now. Come on.
We had a kind of a dry run, a trial run for what would happen when oil peaks.
No gas. No gas today? No.
There was a temporary peak in 1973. Middle Eastern OPEC countries were angry about the 1973 war in Israel, and they embargoed the oil. And we immediately had panic for the future of our way of life and mile-long lines at gas stations.
In the future, things like driving cars and air travel, period.
I would say air travel will substantially stop.
Without oil, we'll be stepping back 200 years, except worse, because most of y'all won't be prepared for it. But me, on the other hand, I'll be ready. And this fool even has a new career in mind, distilling ochre whiskey. And I'll be the richest man in the county, because when this new dark age comes, getting drunk will be about the only pleasure left.
That was too easy. What's the problem? Where's your concentration?